And right now is 22 people, participants. So looks like everything is ready.
Yes.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I would like to bring this joint meeting of City Council and the Planning Commission to order. We will start this meeting by Pledge of Allegiance. I would like to invite Councilor Barnett to lead us for Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Mayor Ding. I pledge allegiance to
Allegiance
the flag
Flag
of
of
the United States of
United States of
America,
America,
and to the republic for which it
for which
stands,
it stands
one nation,
One nation,
under God,
under God,
with liberty and
indivisible,
justice
with
for
liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all.
Thank you so much. Ms. Atkins, could you please take a roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor Ding,
Aye.
Vice Mayor
Present.
Barnett,
Here,
Councilmember Agramonte,
Here.
Councilmember Felder,
here.
Councilmember Lowe,
Here.
Chair Wellender,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Present.
Commissioner Barbos,
Here.
Commissioner McDonald,
Here.
Okay.
Sorry.
Commissioner
Did
O'Neill,
you hear me?
yes,
Sorry about that.
and Commissioner Wyrick.
Here.
All right. Thank you so much. Let's go to agenda number 2, items of discussion. 2.1, housing element in the 6th cycle and the town hall meeting. Housing element in the town hall agendas. Since the 1969, California state requires our local government, that is county and the city, to adequate the plan for the housing needs for each one in our community. The state requires the city and the county government to update our housing element every 8 years. Right now, we are in the end of 5th cycle. We are going to the 6th cycle the next year. So based on this, we should update our current housing element, and the due date for the city to submit our updated information is January 31st, 2023. So exactly, we have the 1 year to work on that. We put everybody together, not only our city council and the planning commissioner, all our developers, our community residents gathered together. So we need to celebrate today because we are expecting this day for a while. Today, we got started, kick off. Next, I would like to invite our city staff, city manager, Mr. Toy, and the planning director, Mr. Stoller, for our detailed introduction and presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the commission. Pretty much, yeah, I'll turn it over to your planning director, Mr. Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members, Commissioner Wellender, and commissioners. This is an exciting day for our city. We begin a public process, and I'm happy to introduce to you 2 experts in the field of housing. That would be Wendy Atkins, our staff planner. She working along with Christina hand in hand, and also our expert consultant, Beth Thompson. Beth, if you want to wave your hand. So I don't know where you are on everybody's screen, but I wanted to introduce you to Beth. Beth and I have known each other for many years, and if there's one person in the state that's going to be able to help us the way that we need it, it's Beth. So I'm happy to turn the time over to you, Wendy, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Ding and Chair Wellender. I'd like to start off tonight with a brief video on what is a housing element. And this was produced by our Napa Sonoma Collaborative. And here we go.
It's time for the City of Sonoma's housing element to be updated. Why should this matter to you? First, it's important to understand what a housing element is. The housing element is part of your city's general plan, developed to address local housing challenges and to find solutions to the housing needs of your community. With your input, these housing needs will be addressed through goals, policies, and programs. Your city's housing element must be updated every 8 years and must be certified by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD. HCD requires your city to identify suitable housing sites for a diverse range of income levels and a variety of housing types. This can include vacant land, existing buildings that can be redeveloped, and single-family houses that have the potential to build accessory dwelling units, or ADUs. Based on demographic data and projected needs, your city must identify enough of these sites to plan for a target number of homes. This is also known as a Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. For this update, Sonoma has been given a RHNA allocation of 311 housing units, including 131 for low-income residents. Now that you understand what the housing element is, let's return to the original question. Why should this matter to you? In Sonoma, any individual making under $65,150 is considered low income. Ensuring there is housing available for low-income residents means ensuring housing is available for vital members of your community, including young adults, older adults on fixed income, and younger families. For example, will your adult children be able to afford to stay in the town they grew up in? Will you be able to raise your family in an affordable home? Will your retiring parents have a safe and comfortable place to live?
Excuse me. Is it possible to increase the volume? I cannot hear very well. It's very low.
The housing element update will plan for strategies to ensure all members of the community can have access to a healthy, safe place to live.
Thank you.
Furthermore,
Did that
by
help?
law, your
Better.
updated housing element must address all the requirements to be certified by HCD. And if your plan is not certified, then Sonoma's decision-making authority can be taken away, and the state can take control over where housing will be built. It's important that the housing element complies with these requirements in order to maintain local control, so that housing policy reflects what the community decides is the best approach for providing enough housing. Your perspective and insight are vital to ensuring that the updated element reflects your housing needs and priorities, which are a key part of creating a plan that upholds your community values. Your community should be an ideal place to live now and for future generations, and the update to the housing element is an opportunity to have these community conversations. How can you get involved? Take a look at the information provided on this slide for more details, and thank you for your participation in these important discussions.
Yes, and thank you for the opportunity tonight to speak to everyone about the City of Sonoma's housing element.
Thank you. That is wonderful.
The focus of the meeting tonight is on providing you with information. We're not going to be asking for any action to be taken by the City Council or the Planning Commission. This is just an opportunity to provide an overview of the process and listen to comments. I'd like to take this opportunity to again introduce our team. I'm Wendy Atkins, Associate Planner and the project lead for the Housing Element Update. I'm here tonight with Christina Tierney. She's an Associate Planner as well. Our fearless leader, David Storer, is here. And our our housing element consultant extraordinaire, Beth Thompson, is here. She's with Denova Planning Group. Denova Planning Group has completed 21 housing elements, and each of the elements have been certified by HCD. Personally, Beth has worked on over 30 housing elements in the capacity of a manager or a technical advisor. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Beth and turn the wheel over to her. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the Planning Commission. It's exciting to be here with you tonight to kick off your housing element update. And I do have a presentation to go through. I'm going to hit on some of the same points that Mayor Ding and the video you just watched also hit upon. So there will be a little bit of repetitiveness, but with housing elements, sometimes it's good to hear the same thing a couple of times because there's a lot to digest when it comes to your housing element update. So this is the 6th cycle of housing element updates. And I'll just briefly go through some basic components of what a housing element is, what's included in it, the city's community engagement strategy, the city's regional housing needs allocation, and then your accomplishments under your 5th cycle housing element. And then we'll talk about next steps in your housing element update process. So in 1969, the state began requiring all cities and counties within the state to adopt a housing element to address their fair share of housing needs and to plan for adequate housing for their communities. And every city and county in California is required to update its housing element on a regular basis. And Sonoma must update it every 8 years. The housing element is one of the elements of the city's general plan. It looks at housing needs of the community and constraints to development within Sonoma. It is the city's plan for implementing programs and policies and actions related to housing. So the housing element plan does guide the city's housing activities over the next 8 years. The housing element's intended to identify the community's housing needs and also to address how the community will address its allocation of regional housing needs. And sometimes those differ from the specific needs that are enumerated and identified by the community. We don't only look at new housing development, we also look at the city's need for rehabilitation of existing housing units, conservation of your current affordable housing units, and how fair housing is being addressed in the city. And as we look at these needs, we develop policies and programs to achieve the goals and objectives of the housing element. In many cases, we carry forward the programs that are in your current housing element. In this round, you'll also see a number of new programs as state law has changed in quite a few areas, and the bar is continually being raised for every jurisdiction in the state. The housing needs includes a pretty lengthy background component that's very data laden. It includes a housing needs assessment that looks at data, socioeconomic data, demographic data regarding the housing needs of all residents in the community, including special needs groups. And this looks at population trends, household formation trends, housing unit types, characteristics of your housing stock, such as the age of the housing stock. And we look at how well those housing characteristics match the current needs of the community in terms of affordability of housing and size of housing unit and type of housing stock. We also look at your current housing element, how that's been implemented and how effective that has been in achieving the city's housing needs from the 5th cycle. And we'll include an entire chapter that goes program by program through your current housing element, assessing its implementation. We also look at constraints to the development of housing. And there are 2 types of constraints that can affect the housing development. And that includes governmental constraints. So those are zoning regulations, general plan requirements, and other standards and requirements that the city places on new development, as well as requirements by the state. And then there also are non-governmental constraints, which include environmental hazards, the housing market itself, the cost of land, availability of financing, et cetera. So we look at constraints from a very broad spectrum to identify what can be reducing or be posing a barrier to housing development, rehabilitation, and conservation in the city. We also look at resources available for housing. And so we look at financial resources, funding for new construction, funding sources available for housing rehabilitation, as well as funding available to preserve subsidies for assisted units. And then one of the most important resources the city has to accommodate its housing needs is, of course, the inventory of residential sites. And this is an inventory of vacant and underutilized sites within the city that are designated to accommodate either purely residential development or a mix of uses that include residential development that can assist the city in meeting its housing needs during the sixth cycle. The state law does require the city to address housing needs of all income groups. So we're not just looking at accommodating a number of housing and a total number of housing units, but we're looking at how well those sites that are available in the city match up to specific needs groups, the very low, moderate, and above moderate income groups, which we'll get to in a couple of slides. And we also look at needs of populations that have unique or special housing needs. And these include seniors, persons with disabilities, including developmental disabilities, large families with 5 or more persons, farm workers, which also include workers in the forestry industry, female heads of households with children present in the home, and persons who are homeless, unhoused, or at risk of becoming homeless. Another component of the housing element that's a new addition to this sixth cycle is the affirmatively furthering fair housing analysis. AB 686, Assembly Bill 686, requires housing elements that are adopted after January of last year to include this assessment. And it's intended to overcome patterns of segregation that communities may have experienced and to foster inclusive communities that are free from barriers that restrict access to housing opportunity and access to resources and opportunities based on protected characteristics. And to address this, every housing element includes an assessment of the city's fair housing outreach and enforcement capacity, patterns of segregation and integration that exist within the community and the surrounding area, identification of racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, as well as concentrated areas of affluence, disparities in access to opportunities. And when we're looking at access to opportunities, we're not only looking at access to safe and adequate housing, but we're also looking at whether or not housing is located in a manner that allows all persons access to educational opportunities, to jobs, to economic opportunities, and to housing that's in areas that are equitably located in terms of exposure to environmental hazards and health and safety issues. We also look at disproportionate housing needs that may occur within your different special groups and the opportunity or concern regarding the potential for displacement of housing, either due to conversion of housing units or displacement due to the quality of the unit. So this will be a pretty lengthy assessment. The state issued guidance on how to conduct the affirmatively furthering fair housing analysis last April. And as housing elements in Southern California right now are going through their sixth cycle, we're seeing some evolution and guidance from the state regarding this issue. So it's a bit of a moving target right now, but we expect that by the time your housing element is submitted, there will be quite a number of certified housing elements that give a pretty good idea of what the state is expecting to see related to this topic. When we develop all of this background information, we take it, we go through it, we receive also community input, which I'll discuss in a few slides. And based on what we hear from the community and what the data tells us, we develop goals, policies, and programs for Sonoma's housing element to address those identified housing needs and constraints and to reduce impediments to fair housing choice. And the city's housing element must ensure that there's adequate land that's available to meet your housing needs. It has to have programs that facilitate affordable housing development and development of housing for special needs groups. It also must mitigate or reduce the governmental constraints on housing development that are within the city's control and promote equal access to housing. What if your housing element isn't in compliance? What can happen then? There are a number of issues and concerns related to housing elements being out of compliance with state law. And if it's out of compliance because it is one of the elements of your general plan can then be found to be inadequate and invalidated. You also do not have access to a number of state grant and loan programs, which require an HCD or State Housing and Community Development Department certified housing element in order for the city to access funding. You're open to legal suits and attorney fees. You're open to the loss of permitting authority. And then lastly, financial penalties for being out of compliance. So there are a number of adverse actions that can occur related to having a housing element out of compliance. And of course, it's our intent and goal to make sure that the city is in compliance with the state law. We've developed some background data related to the city's housing trends. Your housing population or your population has grown steadily over the past several decades. It hasn't grown at a skyrocketing rate, but it's definitely grown steadily with a slight drop based on the Department of Finance data between 2020 and 2021. And similarly, you also have seen increases in your housing units. Looking at Sonoma compared to the rest of the county and the overall region, the city does have slightly smaller average household size than the surrounding area. You have a number of large households, but not as higher as rates as high as the county and the region. Your vacancy rate is a bit higher than Sonoma County, as well as the larger Bay Area region. And that's largely due to a number of homes that are vacant due to seasonal or other reasons. Your household median income is higher than that of the county. And you also, conversely, have a larger number of households under the poverty level. Your jobs to household ratio, which means the number of jobs for every household in the community, is 0.9, so almost a 1-to-1 ratio. And then you have a homeless population that was estimated at about 50 persons. And so the housing element will include a lot more data than this, and also discussion analysis of data, but this is just a preview of what's to come in your draft housing element document. When we're developing the housing element, it's really important to hear from your residents, your property owners, your business community, and other stakeholders who are invested in what's happening in Sonoma to determine what needs and priorities need to be addressed in the housing element. And our intent with the community engagement effort is to make sure that the public and your residents are aware of what the housing element is, the process to update the housing element, and the state requirements for the housing element update. It is unique as an element of the general plan, and that there's a really significant body of state law that directs the information, goals, and programs that have to be included in the housing element. So we want to make sure your residents and community understand what has to be included in the housing element, as well as where the city has flexibility to address unique needs of the community. We want to work to build an understanding of the housing element's implications for the city, and also to achieve some participation that's representative of a broad spectrum of your community members. So we don't get input just from one component of the community, but we're getting input from a broad range of members of the community. And in order to do this, we take a number of steps. We work to identify stakeholders such as community-based organizations, service providers, and other entities that may represent various spectrums of your community that may not always participate in city meetings or informal meetings or in surveys, but may be an important component of the process and their voice should be heard. So we work to identify stakeholders that can either provide outreach to those groups or provide input on behalf of those groups, identifying the needs they're aware of. We're working with city staff to make sure that information is accessible across a broad variety of platforms. So information will be available in print and hard copy. It will be available online. So there will be a number of methods that the community can use to access information. And the outreach is intended to be inclusive. We want to hear from all people. We'll be providing translation of the virtual workshop that we'll be preparing, as well as surveys. So those will be available in multiple languages to encourage response from a broader variety of the community. And then I'll let Wendy talk about a couple of other elements that the city's including in its community engagement process.
Great, thank you, Beth. So here's a screenshot of our City of Sonoma website. And if you go down to the bottom, you'll see an icon for the housing element update. And if you click on that, first I'd like to thank Sarah Tracy, our Public Information Officer, for putting all of this information on our website. She worked really hard and it's really much appreciated. So here's some general information on the housing element update. There's a latest news and update page, and the city's committed to updating the website with all the current information. Here is a page on how to get involved. And look, here's the housing element joint public meeting for tonight. There's a page on what is a housing element. And this link is rather interesting. It's the link to the regional housing needs allocation and has a lot of great information on that. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. It did go live, and we're really thrilled about that. In addition to that, the city's also been awarded a grant through ABAG for a subscription to a public engagement tool called Balancing Act. And while we're not quite ready to go live with this just yet, we are working on it. And this tool will be presented in both English and Spanish. So we start off with a clip of the video that you saw at the beginning of this presentation. And then we go down and talk a little bit about the City of Sonoma's housing element update. And with this tool, you get to tell the City Council where you want to see new housing built in the city. This simulation is a great way to explore how different housing densities can help the city meet its housing goals and envisions where all that housing might wind up. So if you click the continue button, it takes you to a page that talks about a map you're going to see on the next page, talks a little bit about the RENA allocation, talks about how you can click on the different headers of planning areas, and you can see their individual boundaries. And then it asks you to create a housing plan, essentially walk in the shoes of a planner and develop a plan. So it asks you a couple of questions. Are you happy with the availability of housing in the city of Sonoma? Well, yes, I am. And are you a resident? Well, yes. This person who's completing this is a resident, and you enter your zip code 95476. And then it takes you to a map where you can click and drag this tag, and you can zoom in on the screen and essentially tell the city, well, I live near the corner of 5th Street West and West MacArthur. So you don't have to actually give your address, just general vicinity of where you live. And if you live in the Springs, then you could move the marker up there. So then you come to the City of Sonoma Housing Element Public Engagement Tool. And it says, you do not have a housing plan. And over on the left-hand side, it shows our RENA allocation of 311 units. And then you can see here, there's a map of the city, and these numbers correspond to the different planning areas in the city. So over here, it talks about the RENA housing needs allocation, and it talks about the individual allocations we have for the different income levels. Here on the downtown district, you can click the I button for more information, and it'll give you all kinds of information on the downtown district. And then if you click on the caret to the right, you can add a comment about the downtown district. You can say no structures over 30 feet. And you can save that comment, and that will be conveyed to the city. And also you can say how many new housing units you'd like to see in the downtown district. And you can start clicking, and you can see over in the upper left-hand side, the housing unit is changing from 311, and it's going down as you allocate housing units to a specific area. And sometimes you'll come to a maximum amount reached, and you aren't able to add any more units to that particular area. And then you'll also see on the map, as you add allocations, the individual planning areas that are associated with that area darken up. So now you can see that the West Napa Sonoma corridor is getting darker. And then we can go down to the Northwest area. And mind you, most people are going to be spending a lot more time determining how many allocations you want for each area. So I'm just trying to move through this quickly so I can show you the next step. So when you start getting close to 0 and you cross the threshold, you have a housing element. So it turns green, and you can see all the areas where you allocated your housing element allocations. And then you can hit the submit button, and you can select your age range, and I'll select under 18. Hopefully we'll get a lot of folks from high school participating, and you can select your gender. You can put in your zip code, your email address, and your address, and you click that you're not a robot, and you would submit the information. And then all of this information gets put into an Excel spreadsheet, and the city can convey all this information to the city council and the planning commission. And we're not quite ready to go live with it, but I just wanted to give everyone a sneak peek of what we've been up to. So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Beth.
All right, and I'll go back to sharing my screen here. And that's a really neat and exciting tool that you have available. The city was fortunate to be one of the communities selected to use the Balancing Act tool, because it really involves and engages restaurant or residents and business owners, property owners in a new way that they can really see how hard it is to allocate those units across the city. As we're conducting community outreach, we have a few steps in the engagement strategy. So we're going to start off with a virtual workshop. You already have the Housing Element 101 video that's available to the community so they can learn about the housing element. And in the virtual workshop, we're going to dive a little deeper, talk about the allocations, some available sites, the data that we've developed, information about the city's current affordability levels, housing that's been developed during the 5th cycle, and then some potential strategies to meeting your housing needs, and also introduce the community to the community survey, where we hope to get some feedback from community members regarding their actual housing needs, housing preferences, and priorities for this planning period. We will also be sending out a survey to stakeholders that are community-based organizations, service providers, and the development community, including affordable housing developers, to receive input from them on behalf of the populations they represent, as well as from the development community related to housing costs and barrier to housing. As we're pulling all this information together, of course, we'll be preparing the draft housing element. And when that's available, we'll present that to the community in an open house. And depending on how things are at that time, that can be in person or virtual. And we'll be giving the community an overview of the housing element itself, the important information in the document, as well as new plans and programs that are proposed in the housing element. And the housing element will be available for a 30-day public review period. Also, during this process, we'll check in with the Planning Commission for a study session to go through all of the materials in the housing element, get some feedback and get some direction on the specific programs to be including and refining the housing element. We will also go out for a 90-day review period with the state, and then we'll come back to the city for adoption. So as we're developing the housing element, one of the key components of the housing element is the regional housing needs allocation. And the city is a member of ABEG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, which is the Council of Governments for the Bay Area region. And ABEG assesses and plans for regional needs, including housing, land use, and environmental protections. And they have developed the methodology that distributes every jurisdiction's housing needs so that the numbers go to each city and county in the region through the regional housing need allocation process. And the RHNA, the regional housing needs allocation, is the minimum amount of housing that every jurisdiction in California has to plan for during the 6th housing element cycle. And when the housing units are allocated to every jurisdiction, ABEG takes into consideration a very large number of factors. So there's a lot of data. And if you've gone through the regional housing need allocation plan, there's a lot of information in that document. When they're divvying out the numbers to jurisdictions, they look at access to opportunity. So areas with a large amount or high amount of resources receive more units. Proximity to jobs. So areas that have transit or automobile proximity to jobs, close to job centers, those areas receive more units. And then they also looked at a social equity factor. So areas that were identified as exhibiting above average racial and or economic exclusion also received a bump in the lower income units that was at least proportional to its share of households. So through all of this math and allocation, the city received a total of 311 regional housing need allocation units. And this includes housing units for the very low income group, which are households earning less than 50% of the area or countywide median income. And for a household of 4, that's households earning less than about $58,150 per year. And the city received 83 very low income units, 48 lower income units, or households earning less than 80% of the median income. The city received 50 moderate income units, which are households in the 80 to 120% of median income bracket, and then 130 above moderate income units. And those are households that are earning over 120% of the area median income, which roughly equates to $123,950 per year for a family of 4. So when you're looking at the RHNA, you have to identify adequate sites to accommodate these 311 units. The city is not responsible for building or producing the housing, but there are some penalties that come when cities don't have housing production at the rate that's anticipated through the RHNA. So looking back at your 5th cycle, what happened with the 5th cycle? So during the 5th cycle, your RHNA was much smaller, 137 units, and the city permitted more than enough units to accommodate the total RHNA number, so 226 units. And of these units, you had 15 very low income units that were primarily multifamily units, 25 lower income units, 13 multifamily moderate income units, as well as 35 ADUs, and then some additional single family units in the moderate income category, and then 125 total above moderate income units. So you had a very good amount of production during your last cycle, and your housing programs, as we'll go through the next slide, you've done a really good job implementing your housing element, developing programs and approaches to address affordable housing. So during the 5th cycle, the city processed a number of development code amendments. One change to allow 100% residential development in the mixed use zone. So you're further encouraging affordable housing and housing production in the mixed use zone. The city increased the affordability term so that the length of time that units are required, so inclusionary density bonus and city funded affordable units must be affordable for at least 55 years, providing for some long-term affordability with those units. The city took a number of steps to incentivize and encourage accessory dwelling units. So the city's development code was updated to allow ADUs consistent with the requirements of state law. The city also provided a fee waiver program to encourage property owners to come in and construct ADUs, and then also to ensure that those ADUs are available as part of the city's permanent housing stock. The city also took steps to prohibit ADUs as new vacation rentals. The city also continued to implement its affordable housing requirement or inclusionary housing requirement for development projects to ensure that all development projects address their share of affordable housing for the lower and moderate income groups. The city supports a 10-bed shelter that's operated by Sonoma Overnight Support. And then during the COVID-19 pandemic, the city's provided emergency assistance to 233 households, helping those households stay in their housing. And then in response to the 2017 fires, the city also proactively took a number of steps to ensure that temporary replacement housing could be built within the city, ensuring that rent gouging did not occur, and then waiving the fees for ADUs during that time frame. So the city's definitely been exemplary in addressing its housing needs and in taking very forward-thinking steps to promote and encourage affordable housing. So that brings us to this cycle, and usually one of the most important questions we hear from every community as well: can we accommodate our housing needs? Where will those housing needs go? So we don't have the final answer for that yet, but we have taken a look at the city's inventory of residential sites. And as we've mentioned, the city has to demonstrate that it has enough land that's zoned and designated at suitable densities to accommodate your allocations for all income levels. If, when we review your inventory of sites, if the city does not have adequate sites, it must include a program to rezone sites within 3 years of housing element adoption. So we want to proactively look at that inventory of sites and identify the realistic capacity on your current lands within the city. And so when we're looking at your sites, we look at the sites that are vacant and the sites that are non-vacant, and we we address the maximum number of units that can be accommodated on each site under your current zoning. And the state typically assumes that the development will occur at about 80% of capacity. So as part of your housing element, we will look at the capacity of your current projects to see if we can bump that up a bit, but typically they look at about 80% of capacity. And then where we have underutilized sites, we also have to address whether or not we're taking into account the current uses of those sites, and if it's likely that those underutilized sites, so sites with existing development, would actually be developed during the planning period. And then another key component of the city's approach to addressing its regional housing need is also the ADUs. And so when we project ADUs, we look at your past performance and continue to project that out over the next 8 years. When we're looking at your very low and low income units, the state does consider 20 dwelling units per acre as the default density. So we can assume that any of your sites that allow at least 20 dwelling units per acre are going to be adequate to accommodate the very low and low income units. We can also include vacant and underutilized sites. And then we can also look at affordability of ADUs to determine if a portion of those can also go toward your very low and low income needs. We've taken a look at the city sites, and there's a number of vacant sites in the city. So the purple sites on this map are sites that are identified by the assessor as being vacant. So the sites with the purple outline. Then there also are a number of underutilized sites. So sites that may have an existing unit but are well under the allowed density, or may have some smaller uses but have the capacity of a large undeveloped area to accommodate additional uses. And those are sites that are outlined in blue. And in just looking at your capacity for your lower income sites, there are a number of areas in the city where we anticipate that development to potentially occur. You have the Montaldo Apartments project proposed by DeNova Homes, and that's a 2.18 acre total site. That's the site up in here, and we've got A and B on that site. And that proposal includes 3 extremely low, 5 very low, 6 low, and 44 market rate units. So we can assume that development on that site would occur within that income level range. Because that's a higher density site, it would also be a site that if that project were pulled or did not go through for one reason or another, we could also assume it to be a very low and low income site. Across the street from the Montaldo apartment sites, we have site number 1. And this site is also designated to allow a mix of residential and non-residential uses at least 20 units per acre. And it has the capacity for about 61 lower income units. We do have to look at some constraints on this site. So we'll be looking at whether or not that development would occur over the whole site or within a smaller area. So we'll be doing some additional calculations. You have 477 West Napa Street, which is the commercial parcel next to the Save Mart development. And that's about a 3 acre site. And that's because it's developed or designated commercial, we would assume that lower income development could occur on about half that site. So that site can be included in your inventory. And then you also have a couple of vacant sites at 45 and 65 Napa Road that under your existing zoning can also be included in your inventory with capacity for about 65 lower income units. So cursorily, you have about enough sites to accommodate your lower income RHNA. And we'll be taking a closer look at those sites and whether or not they're realistic as we go through this with staff. But just as a kind of preview of some of the sites you might see in your housing element, these are some of the sites we've identified at this point in the process. So what does the overall timeline for your update look like? We are currently reviewing your existing conditions, your housing element. We're going to wrap up that review in February. In February and March, we'll put out the virtual public workshop, which will be a video that folks can watch online, as well as the community survey to get input on the community's housing needs and priorities. We're preparing your initial housing element analysis, and we plan to wrap that up by April, with the public review draft housing element going out for public review and sometime in the May and June period. State law has changed as of this January. So before you can submit your housing element to HCD, it does have to go out for a 30-day public review period. So we'll send that out for public review. We'll get comments from the public, and then we'll take at least a 10-day period to respond to those comments. The 10-day period is required by state law to incorporate changes into the housing element to address those comments. And during the public review period, we also anticipate holding an open house to get get feedback as well. Once the housing element is revised, that's submitted to the State Department of Housing and Community Development. They have a 90-day review period. It used to be 60 days, but starting this January, they now have a 90-day review period. So they'll review that housing element. We anticipate getting informal comments during their review period. They typically give us an opportunity to submit revisions. So we'll coordinate with staff to draft revisions to comments they have where the revisions are in line with the input we've received from the decision makers to that point in the process. Once we get HCD's comments, we go through the housing element, we revise it to address comments received by the state. And so that will result in an adoption draft housing element. We anticipate that being ready by December, with that going to the decision makers for adoption in January of 2023, which then will, following adoption, get submitted back to the state for another review period and certification. We anticipate potentially being ahead of schedule because we've pulled together a lot of data and we started working with staff well before this kickoff meeting. So we're doing pretty well in terms of timing. But that's the overall time frame we have, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Mayor, if I can, a couple of comments and observations before we have discussion, and then later open it up to the public. Some to Beth, and then just some as a general comment. Beth, in my prior history, as you know, I've done the housing elements elsewhere. And I seem to recall that if HCD does go ahead and certify, and we're successful in that regard, and I have no reason why we wouldn't be, to think that, but is there not the same presumption of validity that once HCD certifies that under the law that we are consistent with the law in their eyes, and that we should have some kind of protection under that? Can you explain that just for a minute?
Yes, you're correct. So yes, if HCD certifies your housing element, it's presumed to be in compliance with state law. And so if somebody were to lodge a complaint against your housing element, sue the city over it, they would have to demonstrate how the city has failed to implement its housing element, or the burden would be more placed on them than on the city. So yes, you absolutely want a certified housing element to have that additional protection. And the state has become more penalty driven as well. So apart from that, you also have other penalties that occur if you don't have a certified housing element.
Thank you. And then another comment you made, you stated that we have a high vacancy rate. Can you explain how that does not translate in low demand for housing? Because clearly we know that there is a high demand for housing, but a high vacancy rate.
Absolutely. So you do have a high vacancy rate, but those units aren't vacant. They're not rental units that are waiting to be rented or for sale units that are on the market. Those are units that are either owned as vacation rentals, seasonal housing for people, second homes. So those are homes that are not part of your available housing stock. Those are owned by people, and about 8% of your vacant units are being held for seasonal or other uses.
Thank you. And then with respect to the Balancing Act, one of the things that this does that we discussed as staff, and that allows people in the Sonoma Valley to play this planner for a day game or balancing tool. And I think it's very important that we do take comment, not just from those within our city. And as Wendy pointed out, there is that opportunity for people anywhere to play the part. So I just want to kind of make that point there that we're not just taking information from those within our corporate limits. And Beth, you talked very nicely about the ADUs, and when we try to justify to HCD how the planning can occur for those 311 units, divisible into the 4 income categories. You talked about how HCD will actually look at our production of ADUs in order for us to use that annual number extrapolated out for 8 years. We've recently, all as a state, been dealing with SB 9, and in my communications with the HCD, they're not just going to take any number we throw to them about SB 9 projections, because obviously there's going to be some development over the next 8 years with SB 9 units through the parcel map or through the other process, either by right or not otherwise. But when it comes to projecting an SB9 number, we will just have to come up with a number and then justify that to HCD so that we can have that count with ADUs, again, with the sites that we find. Can you just talk about that for a moment?
Absolutely. So yes, you can't just take the maximum number of single family parcels you have in the city and add 3 units to every parcel that only has 1 and say, whoa, voila, we've got all of these SB9 units. The state's going to want to see that the city has a track record of developing underutilized sites or splitting parcels and allowing additional development. Fortunately, a lot of development in the city has been on sites with existing uses. A lot of your development proposals have been to reuse or revitalize sites. So the city has a pretty good track record of reuse. In terms of the SB9 units being affordable to lower income households, those are going to be primarily single family homes or duplex, smaller projects that aren't large multifamily projects. And HCD would not generally assume that those would be affordable to lower income households at a large scale. So we envision those really addressing your moderate and above moderate income need, and perhaps a small portion for the lower income need. But when HCD looks at your inventory of sites, you don't get credit on your inventory for your inclusionary housing program. So you can't say, well, we require X% of every project to provide lower income units. They typically say, well, developers can get around that. They can show that it's not feasible for their project. They cannot provide the units. And so they don't allow jurisdictions to rely on that inclusionary requirement. So that's why we have such a focus on your sites for the lower income group that can accommodate those higher density uses. And the city does have a track record of that type of development.
Yeah, and since we last spoke, our city did adopt an urgency ordinance that did restrict or does restrict all of our SB9 units to be affordable units. And so nobody has a track record throughout the state of California
Right.
about SB9 units. And so
Right.
I think we just need to provide that justification. And I think what we as a city have adopted will help do that.
The first step.
My last comment is the dim view that HCD will take on trying to use our prior sites through the prior 2 elements. That if we put them into our 6th cycle, that we may not be as jolly as we think we're going to be. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Sure. So yes, if you have mixed use sites or mixed use sites from a previous element, your previous cycle, those sites are presumed or must develop under a ministerial process, which means the city's discretionary capacity is taken away for those sites. And there's very specific requirements of state law that address those sites. And similarly, your vacant sites that have been in 2 or more cycles also have to be addressed through that process. And so we really focus on looking creatively at additional sites. And then also your sites, your lower income sites from your previous element, many of those have been developed or have proposals on them. But yeah, if you rely fully on those sites, you have less discretion for approvals of housing. And so those really have to allow affordable housing by right, typically 20% or more of the affordability on if they have 20% or more lower income units, they have to be allowed by right.
Thank you, Beth. And I just thought of one last question while you were giving that answer, and that is regarding should the city during this next cycle entertain annexations? Let's say there's a 60-unit project that we want within our city limits, and how does that work with respect to how those will actually be added to our RENA and subtracted from the counties? Because that's what we're talking about at this point, is future development during the cycle. Can you talk about annexation proposals?
So HCD hasn't developed a specific requirement for annexation, but typically you can work with the county to trade or barter, what the city's fair share of that area would be. If you're annexing land, you want to be thoughtful about the time frame in which it would be developed and make sure that you're looking at your affordability requirements from this period. And if you're annexing, huge tracts of single family development that you're planning to develop solely for single family, you might want to ensure that a portion of that site is designated for higher density uses so that it can be developed and accommodate a share of your RENA, because you don't want to get saddled with a lot of potential development that then negatively impacts you in the next cycle.
Thank you, Beth. Wendy, I'll turn the time back to you for closing comments.
Thank you so much. Yeah, right now it's an open. Yeah, any questions, just ask for Vice Chair Barnett, please.
Thank you, Mayor Ding. I just have a few questions. I noticed that in the RENA numbers, there is no allocation for extremely low category. So I'd like to hear your comments on that. Let me ask all my questions at once, if you don't mind. I also, I want to make sure that that people understand, at least this is my understanding, that the RENA numbers, as we all know, is about designating land uses to meet regional housing needs. It's not a condition that the city actually build the housing or actually that anyone build the housing. It's a matter of land use designation. But on the other hand, the fact that they're suggesting or targeting a goal of 311 units doesn't mean that the city of Sonoma can't exceed that. In other words, if a parcel right now outside of the city limits, adjacent to its urban growth boundary, were acquired by a nonprofit housing developer who wanted to develop it, given our current requirements under annexations to bring a parcel into the UGB, they must be 100% affordable, and 51% of it has to be very low income affordable. My point is that there is no upper limit. We're in theory targeting 311 311 units based on the designation of zoning on the parcels, but there's no reason why we couldn't ultimately over this 8-year cycle have 400 units built or 500 units built. That's a function of the market demand, the money and interest on the part of the development community, and I'd like you to confirm that for me. And then the third one is kind of attached to the question David asked about annexations, which is if we do an annexation, I just want to hear again how that factors into the RENA numbers, given that our UGB requires those annexed parcels to be affordable only.
So those are definitely good questions. I'll start off with the extremely low income group. So the very low regional housing need allocation, the state assumes that 50% of that regional housing need allocation, and I'm going to go back to that slide. So your regional housing need allocation was 83 very low income units. So 42 of those, or 50% of those, would be assigned to the extremely low income category. In terms of designating sites for the extremely low income category, they're just considered along with the very low to be part of that broader very low and low income group. So we don't have to have unique or special sites for those extremely low income households, but we do have to identify in the housing element programs and policies that the city can undertake to ensure housing is available for those extremely low income households. So the need has to be addressed, but not specific sites. In terms of the RENA, you're 100% correct. This is about designating and accommodating housing needs. The city does not have to build those needs, build those housing units. And if, in many jurisdictions, they don't get built during the cycle. And so the state often has really high goals and allocations, but there's typically not enough subsidy or funding available for particularly all of the very low and low income units allocated throughout the state. And yes, you can absolutely exceed that goal. So the RENA is the minimum you must plan for. Cities can definitely have more units than that. And if you have more than that, there's no state requirement that RENA, those percentages get carried across additional units. So any units above the RENA can occur, at any income level. In terms of annexation, I'm going to review the specific requirements and make sure that's clearly addressed in your housing element. But it sounds like you currently have a very high bar for annexations in terms of affordability. And so that would just serve the city well. You would be expanding your capacity for your RENA to accommodate your RENA, and that would give you more flexibility within the city as you're looking at future projects, because one thing you do have to maintain throughout the cycle is adequate sites. And so where you have sites that are designated for very low and low income uses in your housing element, if those sites are used for other purposes or you're losing inventory during the cycle, you do want to keep looking at how you can ensure that that inventory is maintained. So it sounds like your annexation policy is already really aggressive and provides the city some flexibility.
And Beth, to follow up on that, thank you for those answers. The state has or the Attorney General has gone after jurisdictions that have taken lands away from these affordable housing opportunity sites and replaced it with something else. And one thing we'll be looking at as a staff is coming up with a buffer, let's say, of units above the 311 so that we don't ever get ourselves into that situation. And that's something that's a little bit technical for tonight, but certainly something that we'll be talking about as the element gets produced. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. Next is Chair Wallander. And after that, that is Vice Mayor Barnett. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I have just a question for Beth. I noted that you said in our 5th cycle that we did well relative to production. And I'm not going to promote that we get complacent in our 6th cycle, but I would be very curious from a perspective standpoint in your area of expertise, how many other communities actually build out their cycle in the state of California?
Yeah, I'd have to run a search, but I would say less than half build out, and probably even a smaller percentage than that. And particularly when it comes to the very low and low income arena, most jurisdictions or many jurisdictions have a small percentage of that. So yeah, you've done very well, and we can include. I can pull some data from the statewide data and include that in your housing element, because it's definitely important to highlight how well what you have been doing works.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Beth, could I ask a question? This is Madeline. I'm not jumping ahead of anyone, am I?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Oh, God bless me. Well, I'm a lady.
Yes.
Can't I have that? Okay, I'm waiting.
Go ahead. No, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I'm good.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, Council. Yeah, you please. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Beth. That was a great presentation. I appreciate all your help. As Vice Chair Barnett just said, that we can obviously go beyond our RENA numbers during the 6th cycle. Would we then get credit for that for the 7th cycle? I mean, I have a couple questions, but that's the easiest one. No,
there's no direct credit from your 6th cycle production to your 7th cycle, but what does happen is the percentage of the affordability of your existing units is factored into the calculations for the next cycle. So there's a benefit to the city, but yeah, not a one-to-one reduction in your 7th cycle.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then another question I had is, when we're talking about housing sites and potential housing sites in the city, I believe you used the term like HCD looks at realistic potential. And obviously in our city, recently, there's been a lot of discussion just as a function of how development patterns change. You know, we have these sort of, 50s, 60s, 70s style, drive up strip malls, for example, that there's been a lot of thought about providing incentives through zoning to over time redevelopment, to redevelop those sites. I think they're called grayfield sites. And so how would HCD look at something like that, for example, locally, if we through zoning provided density bonuses and incentives to encourage the owners of, the marketplace or Sonoma Market, or even a large auto dealership on West Napa Street, perhaps through a West Napa Street specific plan to start thinking about the future and provide incentives through housing. Is there any potential to have any of those sites count? Or, I guess, talk a little more about what does realistic mean when it comes to HCD?
Okay, so realistic means that the site can reasonably be anticipated to develop under the current zoning and with the current use in place during the 6th cycle. So when we're looking at underutilized sites, if you have more than half of your sites that are, if more than half of your lower income need is accommodated through underutilized sites and not vacant sites, that bar is raised, and you have to have a very detailed analysis that demonstrates the feasibility and realistic nature of those units. If less than half of the sites are underutilized, then that bar is a little bit lower. We still need to discuss the potential for those uses to convert, but we can also look at mainly the city's past performance in underutilized sites. So if you say you did have an auto mall that was going to be redeveloped, we would have to show that that was likely to go out of business, or the owner had an interest in converting the use. So if you have a success, or if it was successful. So if you have a successful existing use, you would need to show that there's a real need for it to convert or financial incentives for it to convert. So yes, if you have a really proactive program that encourages conversion and incentivizes that, then yes, HCD looks favorably on that. They don't look favorably on jurisdictions that identify a bunch of sites and have no carrots for conversion.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Next is Councilmember Agramonte, please.
Thank you, Beth. I wanted to ask a question. I mean, I don't want to get melancholy here, but you know, when you were talking about low and very low housing, the dissolution of the redevelopment agency has really affected cities' ability to build. It's sad. And I just wanted everybody to remember that, possibly pine on it, because I know here in Sonoma, prior to the dissolution, I think it was 2012, affordable housing was very active. There were a lot of projects that went through. So I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Councilmember Lowe, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I was reading up a bit about, and this may have something to do with Councilmember Agramonte's comment, that there is now a regional housing finance authority that has been put together. I see a smile from Ms. Thompson. And I just like to know how we can, because some of the problem we have is financing, how we can avail ourselves of this new regional housing finance authority to assist us in meeting some of our goals. And if someone could speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
And I don't have an answer for that right now, but in your housing resources chapter of your housing element, we will be looking at that and what tools this state has in place for jurisdictions to receive additional financing. You know, there's a lot of the common tools, CDBG, community development block grant funds, home funds, and those only, you know, account for a small amount of your needs. So we will be looking at some newer tools the state is implementing, including the regional housing finance agencies and how that can assist you. But I don't have an answer for you tonight.
Okay, I'm gonna follow up a little bit on that, and maybe at a subsequent meeting we can learn a bit more, because it seems that that could be something that could really help us, because that seems to be a lot of the problem that we have in meeting, if not our goals, our needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Commissioner O'Neill, please.
Thank you, Mayor Ding. I have a question related to the vacancy or the vacant homes. And I'm wondering how deep the data goes to not only look at the vacant homes within the city of Sonoma, but in our sphere of influence in the area right outside the city limits, and how that compares to some of the other similar communities that might have a vacation second home component to them, and how they are handling that. So I may be asking for more data that exists, Beth, but if there's anything that you have that you could shed a light on, I just feel like there's a giant resource there that I just don't know if we have the ability to tap into, or to further restrict vacation rentals to try and open that up.
And that's a really good point. And so one of the things we can do, we don't look at that data at the census tract or block group level for all of your surrounding census tracts, but we can compare the city's data to other jurisdictions in the region. Census data does go fairly deep in terms of breaking out the various types of vacancy. And so it is the American Community Survey data. It's a 5-year average that we look at. So it's not as precise as the decennial census, which should be a 100% count and full reflection of your population and a good higher sample of your households. But we pull that ACS data in, and so we'll have that in the housing needs assessment chapter of your housing element, and we can identify some strategies that other jurisdictions use. You're already taking steps to reduce use of accessory dwelling units, and you're addressing vacation rentals, but there probably are other things the city can look at to ensure that your housing stock is available for your permanent residents.
Thank you.
Thank you. If any comments?
Yeah, Mayor Ding, Commissioner McDonald would like to speak.
Oh, all right. Hi, Commissioner McDonald. Your turn, please.
Thank you very much. This is also directed to you and also to our consultant and to staff. I believe that there could be potential for the city to work with other government agencies, such as the school district, such as the other sort of jurisdictions within the city, such as the library, public works, whatnot, and in looking at properties that government actually has control over, and to be able to look at those as resources. I had heard that we do have a potential financing capability if jurisdictions were to work together on looking at those underutilized properties and provide low-income housing on those sites. Also, I wanted to find out if there are any prototypes that the city could use in its housing element to encourage housing, such as working with nonprofits on underutilized churches and other sorts of institutions that could potentially also provide housing. A good example would be a church that would help sponsor maybe a very low-income apartment complex for seniors and those sorts of things. So I guess my first question is, are there prototypes and that we could use in looking at our update to our housing element? And then also, would we be able to include those in our RENA numbers, and also in terms of our zoning, look at those zones and make changes to those zoning districts that would also allow for housing and also create performance standards on those sites so they could be master planned and accommodate housing. So those are my comments.
So yes, there's definitely the capacity to work with other public entities and nonprofits to identify sites that are controlled by those organizations to accommodate the city's housing needs. We would have to demonstrate that there's interest on behalf of that entity in developing affordable housing, or that the site's existing zoning or proposed zoning would accommodate that. But that's definitely an opportunity, and you can include programs in your housing element too. We can identify potential sites and programs to really investigate and promote the development of those sites during the planning period. In terms of prototypes to encourage nonprofits and underutilized public and quasi-public uses, such as churches and other community-oriented organizations, there are definitely models, and there are a lot of nonprofits and faith-based organizations that provide affordable housing. And there's several models that the city can look at and incentives the city can offer. And the city already has a number of incentives for affordable housing in its current housing element. So carrying those forward and ensuring that those are proactively introduced to developers and owners of or developers and entities of sites that you really wish to attract to the city, or sites you want to see reused, can be highlighted in the housing element update.
All right.
Thank you.
Any more comments or questions? If not, I have Commissioner Barros, please. Unmute, please.
Okay. I was looking at a report by a regional housing group that had some interesting statistics relative to Sonoma's housing stock. And they go together, the two I want to mention. Sonoma, of all the cities in the county, has the largest share of senior households. Those would be households with people over 65. 33% of the households in our city are, as our house is, occupied by people over 65. And an interesting statistic is that Sonoma also has the largest share of households with a single person living in a single family dwelling. So you got one person living in a house, and I would imagine that perhaps in the past there were more than one person there. But it just brought to mind a program that I learned about some years ago in the city of Petaluma, where there's a nonprofit that attempts to work with homeowners who actually would like to find somebody compatible who needs housing to come in with them and be in their house. And I'm not much help here. I think the woman's name is Elise Stencil or Stemple, something like that. She's from Petaluma, and it's a housing nonprofit. But I just think that's worth a consideration in terms of options to just, it could serve a couple of problems, not only help the people in the houses by themselves, but find housing for people who would assist them. So any event, I just thought I'd bring that up because the statistics are so glaring.
That's an important item to note, and we'll definitely explore that in the housing element update.
Vice Chair Barnett, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have one last question. I recall in your presentation that one of the pieces that you examine is the area of finances available to the city to assist in various ways in the creation of housing. At present, the city has an affordable housing trust fund that has very little money in it. And the programs that have been put in place to increase the amount of money in it are going to, in my opinion, add relatively small amounts given what it actually costs to build housing in Sonoma. Presently, we're drawing on 1% of the transient occupancy tax that's going into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. But given the current situation, it's probably going to amount to $300,000 a year, which buys a couple of bathrooms and a kitchen stove. So my question to you is, when you do the analysis of the financial piece on this, are you going to be looking as well at recommending potential revenue sources to the city, which is to say additional programs, fees, tax programs, shifting in budget allocations, or other approaches that we can use to quickly beef up in a permanent way in terms of predictable yearly revenues for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, so that we can ultimately use the city's bonding authority to do something like generate 20 or 30-year bonds for 10, 20, or $30 million to really be able to be a player in terms of land purchases and financing of projects.
Absolutely. We can absolutely identify programs and mechanisms to assist the city in increasing your affordable housing trust fund. And we won't necessarily jump into the city's budget and start recommending swapping between various funds, because I think your city manager and your finance director in various departments would want to have some input on how that plays out. But there are some state tools to match some of your affordable housing trust fund dollars, and there's other programs out there. So, and there's other mechanisms that communities use. And you've been exploring having, for example, a non-residential affordable housing fee, and you have your inclusionary housing fee. So there's some steps you've already taken, but we can look at some additional mechanisms the city could explore.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
My question is in the following. Because we have the numbers 311, my understanding is the city will try the best in the next 8 years using the money to purchase the land and to build up the affordable housing. However, just like the Vice Chair and Barnett said, we didn't accumulate much of the fund for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. However, so that we still have the shortage of the numbers. So under this kind of situation, how the partnership and to the city of the Sonoma, what is the legal consequence at this point?
So
To meet the number, because financially we are not able to purchase the land to build affordable housing. We tried the best. We didn't cross the line. We are compliant, but we didn't meet the numbers. What kind of situation?
So the burden is not on the city to purchase the land and to develop those units. That's a very proactive approach to take and very be heavily supported by the state, but definitely the burden isn't on the city. You have to designate adequate sites and have programs in place to accommodate that development should the market move in that direction. But so you're not penalized if you haven't assembled land and made sure it's available in terms of the city owning it or the city making sure that it's owned by affordable housing developers. So there's not a high penalty in that regard. However, for jurisdictions that are performing well below the requirement, there are some ministerial requirements, some ministerial housing approval requirements that come into play. And we'll talk about those in the housing element update, but they're definitely, if you identify adequate sites in your housing element, that's the biggest step towards demonstrating compliance with the RENA.
Thank you. Another small question is RENA, this word, sometimes I read that is the regional housing, the allocation or something that assessment. What the difference? Allocation and assessment, if any, the difference or the same thing?
It might just be people using that term, but it's typically referred to as the regional housing need allocation and not an assessment.
Thank you. Councilmember Agramonte, please.
Thank you. Steve, I wanted to let you know, and Beth, the name of the home sharing program is SHARE. I don't know if it's still in existence, but we tried to utilize that program with homeless and people who are, obviously needed places to live, and it worked for some, but I don't know if it's still there. Many counties have their own organizations where, as you said, senior housing, some people have 5 bedrooms and, it's just one person living there, but the name of it is SHARE. I don't know what that stands for, but it's just SHARE.
Thank you so much. If there are no any further question, I would like to open to the public. Wendy?
Yeah, so Christina Tierney is going to help me with public comment.
All right.
Maybe not, so I'll just go ahead. David Begro, you can go ahead and speak.
Sorry, there's a delay.
Hi, David, it's your turn.
Okay, just a couple of comments here. I'm glad to hear, as I suspected already, that this housing inventory must show some sense of realism. I remember at some point people were talking about building out on top of the Safeway parking lot, on top of a parking area, and then that clearly isn't going to work for Sonoma, and we just need to get rid of that kind of stuff. Fourplexes on the east side, again, I'm glad to hear that that's not going to be included in any housing inventory. But realistically, again, affordable housing developers need a site suitable for doing 40 units or more. They work with low-income housing tax credits, and these projects are not viable or feasible without that 40-acre site. So coming up with little tiny sites here and there, little tiny lots in purple on the east side and everything, that's never gonna deliver what people really want or need. The UGB, in my opinion, is overly restricted. it requires 4 out of 5 city council members to annex. That's a higher threshold than just about any other municipal activity by a city council, period. And I would hope that that's pointed out as being an overly restricted barrier to annexing housing if we need to do so. Also, we're on the 6th cycle here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I know we massively underproduced affordable housing and massively overproduced market rate. Can this be even included in our housing element report? Historical past underproduction of affordable housing, because it seems like that's been a failure in the past. Also, again, on the redevelopment funds, that's tax increment money, and I know a lot of that was going to schools and other places, but is there any component of the tax increment money that used to go to the redevelopment agency that has reverted into the city's general fund and could be put back into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in addition to TOT and some of these other items? It seems to me that all the redevelopment money went away, but maybe not all of it did. I do have that question. And again, I want to point out that the glory days of Sonoma affordable housing production consisted of the city using redevelopment funds to purchase land and bank it, which is every affordable housing developer's dream, to have a city say, this is the land, this is where we want you to build, we're going to zone it that way, and you don't have to worry about it. This is our contribution. But again, thank you, and I hope to stay involved in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brigo.
Looks like next we have Cal Weeks.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. It's Cal Weeks, Policy Director with Generation Housing. First, just for your own edification, it's actually Amy Appleton, Share Sonoma County. She is the Executive Director, and they are still very much active. And yeah, they're, it helps people that are, land rich, property rich, and cash poor, pair them together, et cetera, et cetera. It's a good program. In respect to this process and kind of what we're looking for, what we're hoping for, I really want us to try to the best of our ability to be bold. To the previous speaker's point, he is correct in the sense that these small properties may not cut it, because by and large these sites will not pencil out for larger projects, or smaller projects. And so I don't know exactly off the top of my head now what we can, do in the particular scenario of the city of Sonoma, but I certainly welcome the opportunity to engage with all of you and to engage with the community to try and identify opportunities, perhaps through maybe an affordable housing overlay. I don't know if that's going to help. There's possibilities, I've been told, for rezoning West Napa Street. So there's some opportunities there, often, and I think a lot of you know this, but often one of the, inhibiting factors when it comes to development is too many barriers in terms of impact fees and other associated fees that come with development. So removing those barriers can help stimulate growth. I could go on and on, but I'll spare you for now. I just certainly hope that you're receptive to trying to essentially identify ways that we can grow Sonoma in a kind of gentle density kind of fashion. I think there's certainly opportunities. I think maybe some folks might be uncomfortable for a while. It is a change, and change is always uncomfortable. But I just hope you'll be open and candid and willing to have conversations with us. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Weeks.
Sorry, I don't see any other hands raised.
All right.
Oh, there's Fred.
Oh, okay. Fred, that is your turn.
All right, Fred, you're on.
Oh, sorry, I had to unmute. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me tonight. Beth, you mentioned that there was be a penalty for failing to meet arena performance. And I was curious what that might be. And apropos of David Brigaud's comment, I looked at the Reno website and found that from 2000 to 2020, in the last 20 years, the city had underproduced moderate and below by 263 units and had overproduced market rate housing by 296. That's a similar pattern in the county as well. And you mentioned that only half of cities in California were able to produce their lower income units. So I was just curious if in the sixth cycle there's a penalty for failing to produce that. And another question is you had mentioned the jobs to housing ratio. And I know Generation Housing, who Cal is with, has a stat that there's in Sonoma has 5 low wage jobs for every low income unit. And so I didn't see that in that chart there. So I wondered if there's if you have that Generation Housing data that where they got that statistic. And then also I was curious, how many maps can we draw? Do we get to pack the map, with have all our friends give our version of the map, or is, just curious about that, or is you get our ID number of our computer and say that's the only map you get? Sorry. Let's see what else do I have. Oh, and as far as if RENA is relying on the market to produce these units, in our SB9 process recently, it kind of came out that even a 500 square foot ADU or 600 square foot is going to sell for $700,000 plus, so that basically there is no affordable by design in Sonoma. So I was curious, with that kind of postulation in the SB9 process that we just went through, it seems like that the market won't be able to produce anything, that it will have to be all deed restricted and with nonprofit developers and go through that route, by showing cooperation with nonprofit developers, et cetera. So that's just a couple of questions I have for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Alabak.
Mr. Mayor, David here. If there are no other speakers, I'll make some preparatory comments and then turn some time over to Beth. But let's see if there's any other comments before I make a few remarks. Christina, do you see other folks ready to go?
No, I don't see any other hands. Does anyone else want to speak?
Thank you, Christina.
Yeah, so Mr. Mayor, this a question partially to Beth again. In prior lives, I know HCD, Beth, have taken a dim view of identifying an opportunity site less than half an acre. And I think, is it 9 acres or 10 acres on the other end that they kind of are not too fanatical about? Can you just talk about that for a moment?
Correct. So there's a presumed affordability for parcels that are 0.5 to 10 acres in size that are designated for 20 or more units per acre. So if your parcels meet that criteria, HCD assumes that those sites can be developed for very low and low income uses. If we have smaller sites or larger sites that the city wishes to include in the inventory, then we have to demonstrate the city's track record in producing units that are comparable to what's being projected on those sites. So yes, there's a much harder time accommodating your affordable requirement with those smaller sites or extremely large sites. When I showed the map of sites, by the way, I just want to clarify for any public concern, those sites were not all sites for lower income housing. Those were all of the vacant and underutilized parcels that can accommodate residential uses in the city that we've identified based on assessor data and reviewing your previous housing element, working with Wendy to look at your approved projects and pending projects. So that's not a city lower income housing map. And I don't want the community to think that those sites are being relied on. So there's a portion of those sites that are appropriately zoned and designated will be looked at for that need.
And those, Beth, will go towards the 311 after we've culled the half acres, the 10 acres out, whether they've got infrastructure, sewer, water capabilities to show to HCD that they can be reasonably expected to be developed during that 8-year cycle.
Precisely.
Thanks. Another comment, and I'm probably going to do a really bad job of this one, but with respect to a common misconception about past underproduction, please remember that each housing element that the city of Sonoma has produced has been compliant with the law, in that the city has provided the correct colors on a zoning map to allow for the then present RHNA to be accommodated. Again, now whether the market has delivered that production of those 4 income categories to make the RHNA number. For example, in our current element, we have, in the 5th cycle, we have 137 units. Luckily, we can say that with the Saha project, we've been able to tick the box for this whole 8-year cycle, of which again, we have 2 years left for the very low income. We've met the number for the low income. So we've exceeded it for the very low income, met it for the low income, exceeded it for the moderate, and of course, like everybody else, we've exceeded it for the above moderate as well. But at the same time, there is no penalty because the city is not the one to produce. So it's not that the city has underproduced, the market has underproduced. We've always been compliant with the state of California with the housing elements. Otherwise, they wouldn't certify them. Can you add anything more to that, Beth?
What I will add is in terms of the production-based penalties, so as part of the 2017 housing package that was approved, there's been over the past 5 years a flurry of new housing laws and a lot of legislation to address affordable housing and to increase the ability for developers to bring affordable housing projects forward. And SB 35 did include the requirement that jurisdictions that don't meet certain production targets have to allow by right certain developments. So Sonoma's in the category for certain projects that include 10% or more affordability. If those projects meet certain criteria, they're allowed to proceed in a streamlined fashion. And then for some jurisdictions, there's a requirement for projects that have 50% or more affordability also have to proceed in a streamlined fashion. And so the state does update that every year. So they have a statewide determination for cities that fall and counties that fall within those categories. And so that's the streamlined requirement based on your production.
And on that very specific point, Beth, we have actually now met our RHNA, but it was post the halfway line of this current cycle, which then will put us in good standing for the next cycle, that review we will not be then subject to SB 35. And I'm sorry for getting into the weeds on this one, but this question has come up in a public meeting before. Could you address that for us, please?
So I would anticipate that you're currently based on the reporting period in one category, but your 2021 report's going to go in by April, and by mid this year, the state will probably update those determinations.
All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Barbos, please.
Yes, just another comment, an observation. I realize this whole process is in large part about creating something on paper that shows that units could be built and therefore satisfies the RHNA allocation. But there's something that was said by Beth a few minutes ago that just motivates me to say something. And that is the assumption that if there's a density of 20 or more, that those will be affordable. That assumption is so so unrealistic. We know from past experience what exactly will happen when you have a market rate 20 unit or more project. The only units we're going to get affordable in that are going to be the ones required by our inclusionary ordinance. And that's it. So it kind of bothers me that we pat ourselves on the back for creating this thing that makes it look like we're actually doing something we're not. So I just want to just say that up front. I don't like that part of this process. And I think it's disingenuous.
And that's a frustration for many jurisdictions that it doesn't necessarily match what you will see in terms of real affordability.
All right. Councilor Barnett, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to piggyback on what Planning Director Storer just said in terms of the first half of the RHNA cycle for the 5th cycle and how that corresponds with SB 5. Is that what you were talking about, David? And how we were sort of penalized for that. And I just want to make the point that the city of Sonoma approved all the relevant, from what I understand, units for that cycle in the first half. And in my view, we should not be penalized under SB 35. But because RENA, and correct me if I'm wrong, and HCD doesn't count approved permits, they count building permits. And because Saha missed out on their funding for that first year, and it was carried over to the next year, we are now subject to SB 35 when on our end, we did everything we were supposed to do. And so I think this is something the state should look at, because we approved every permit and every use permit that was required under SB 35 and under the RENA process. The fact that they missed out on their tax increment financing during that next year and it extended to the next one, extended us to the second half of that cycle. And again, we're sort of in the weeds here, but I just think it's another example of where the city is, we're doing everything we can to support creating more affordable housing in our city.
Great. Thank you. Any more comments or City Manager, Mr. Toy, do you have anything to say or?
No, I don't, Mr. Mayor. I think the
Okay.
planning director and the consulting firm did
All
a
right.
great job in providing information.
And Mr. Mayor, can you thank them all?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. I'm just going to say, yeah, I really appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor,
you know,
if I can, this is David again, sorry. I keep talking over you, so I'll stop. You keep talking, and then when you're done, let me know, because there's a gap between
yeah.
when you talk.
You talk. Yeah. David, you talk. Mhm.
Wendy and Beth, could you just let us know a timeline for what the next step is for us to resurface either at the Planning Commission or City Council or in a workshop or some of the next steps, please?
Go ahead, Beth.
Absolutely. So we're anticipating getting the community survey out in February and March, along with a virtual workshop. So that'll be something that your community can watch online at their leisure and convenience, and then fill out the survey and give us some input. And then we anticipate a check-in with the Planning Commission and or City Council prior to the draft housing element going out for public review. So I would anticipate that occurring in late March or sometime in April. So we'll be checking in with you when we have some development, when we've developed a lot of the data and have some suggestions as to policies and programs. And then, of course, a community-wide open house in late May or mid-June late May through mid-June. We'll have a community opportunity as well to provide feedback on that draft housing element. And we can provide a nice schedule for Wendy to pop up on your new housing element update website.
And Beth, would your presentation be available that we could put on our website?
Of course, I'll provide it to Wendy as a PDF.
That's great.
Thank you.
And also to put the link on the website as well. That's great. All right, today we really have a great start. It's sort of short, but I think very efficient, and especially in the Beth, give us very deep professional analysis and update. I really, really appreciate it. And also the Wendy and the Davey, you take care of the day-to-day, follow up this. I know it's a little bit late, but I think during the pandemic, we did our best. And also we do have a good plan for the future. Basically, affordable housing and the RENA, it's a big issue for us. But today we focus on the RENA number. But I think, we are not only look at the RENA number. I know I look at this update on the housing element. It's kind of a community, education process. Out in the community, out in the council member, the planning commission, we work together. And then we started a new law and we got a lot of the new information. And then we understand each other and we understand each other's opinion. And then we can find a more common grounds. So I'm very optimistic for the RENA number 311. Not only because of the previous, we exceeded a lot of the numbers. The more important is we have a great community. We have a very educated and concerned community. Everything good for our future. And also during this period of time, 1 year, we know more each other and we can get along for the future. And I look at the 2015's, and that is the 5th cycles. I look at the context name. Most of us, the name on the list. I'm so glad, we 8 years later, we still do this project. So then again, thank you everyone, and thank you for our communities, especially Fred and David. You have, speak loud. You are long time advocates for affordable housing. We really appreciate it. Again, thank you everyone, and a good night.
Good night. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Agramonte.